Welcome to the Motorcyclist podcast. This is where we talk about motorcycles and what makes them great. Topics on this podcast are constantly going to change, but the one thing that's always going to remain is two-wheeled fun. In this episode, we're talking about EICMA 2024. This is the biggest motorcycle show of the year. Every year, it's held in Milan, Italy, in the first week of November traditionally, and it's where manufacturers usually choose to show off their newest motorcycles, concepts, and technologies. So this year there was nearly 100 introductions, new models, updated models, concepts, new technologies, as we said. But on this podcast today, we're going to talk about new models that really made an impact, that really made a splash. And next week, we're going to talk about concepts, which also made a big splash. But this week, new models, what made a splash, what's different, and what we like about them. So let's start off with some introductions. We've got Adam Waheed. He's the editor of Motorcyclist magazine. We've got Bradley Adams. He's the in-market editor for Cycle World. And you got me, Justin Dawes. I am the executive editor of Cycle World magazine. So when we start this off every week, we're going to talk about what we're riding just so you can know what we're doing week to week. So Adam, what have you been riding?
Lately, Justin, I've been riding that Bear 650 Scrambler from Royal Enfield. Great little bike, super affordable, easy to ride, and it does it all from the street to a little bit off-road.
Nice. And you can, do you have a review up on Motorcyclist online yet for that?
Yeah, we have our initial everything you need to know about the Royal Enfield Bear 650, which just covers the high features and benefits of that product. We're going to have a more in-depth review here shortly and probably some ancillary reviews on that vehicle as well. But yeah, it's a great bike. Check it out. If you're looking for a Scrambler style motorcycle that's really affordable, you should check out that Bear 650.
It's a good looking bike. I think it's one of the best looking Royal Enfields. And that's saying something because they got cool bikes. So, Bradley, what about you?
Ooh, a couple things lately, but the one that I spent the most time on recently was Indian 101 Scout. Kind of one of my favorite mid-displacement cruisers this year. Really liking that thing. It's so funny because we've also got a Harley-Davidson Sportster S parked in the office, and then seeing that 101 Scout come in, I was like, this was the kind of middleweight performance cruiser we've been looking for. So yeah, I really enjoyed the time on that thing. Really good-looking bike with just enough performance on it, so you can still have fun on a cruiser. It's got the cruiser vibes to it, but with a little bit of performance, which I love. So that's been the standout for me lately.
Yeah, our sport bike guy is turning into a cruiser guy somehow. It's very
Funny
strange
how that happens. Yeah.
So also he's got his review already up on cycleworld.com, so you can go check it out there. For myself, I was just at the Moto ADV Fest in Julian, California, and we were kind of like a little bit of a guest of honor there with our Suzuki V-Strom project from Cycle World. So we have a Suzuki. I rode that there. That's the last thing I rode, which is a completely ridiculous V-Strom 800 with way more suspension travel, and it's basically a big dirt bike, and it's ridiculous, and it's really fun. And if you want to read about that, it's on cycleworld.com as well. We have a full race build, a full race story. We raced it in a rally in Mexico, and it's a lot of chaos, and it's worth a watch.
And some other people got to throw a leg on over that thing, right? Which was the first time anyone else got to ride that bike.
Yeah. We let actually the second person to ride it was Chase, who is the Suzuki PR contact, and he has his own V-Strom and 800, and he went riding with me, and we switched bikes, and he got off it and was blown away. And he's like, I got to figure out how to get Japan here to ride this thing, to understand we need a V-Strom rally. So maybe we can help everyone get a super gnarly Suzuki adventure bike at some point.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
All right. Well, on that note, now we got new bikes. Speaking of new bikes, right?
Yes. Let's start off with Ducatis. There's been much gnashing of teeth and clutching of pearls from the Ducatistas about this new V2 engine and two new V2 models, the Panigale V2 and the Street Fighter V2.
Yeah, and I think it's been an interesting year for Ducati because going back, I got to ride Panigale V4 a couple months ago, double-sided swing arm, full new look on that, and now you're bringing a lot of that into this new Panigale V2. It's really interesting. I think this is we're seeing a trend, right, in the sport bike space toward they're calling them next gen super sports, but in this case, what Ducati is doing is trying to build a more affordable sport bike, something that's a little bit, I don't know, I guess soft around the edges in some ways. It's a little bit more street oriented, and that starts kind of with a smaller displacement engine, right? I mean that.
Yeah. So smaller displacement engine with less horsepower also and less torque. So another like, oh, what is Ducati doing? But this 890 CCV twin that they've built is, it's one way to get around emissions. It's one way to lower the costs. It's one way to reduce maintenance costs because it does have spring valves instead of Desmo, which is another big change. So while it's kind of following the concept of less expensive, more affordable, softer sport bikes, I don't think they went all the way like everyone else does. They still, it's still a Panigale and it's still a Street Fighter. So
Yeah, it will forever be, it'll be tough for Ducati to ever get away from that. I mean, there's always going to be some underlying performance to those motorcycles. And so, yeah, let's look at the numbers based on my notes. So 120 horsepower versus 155 on what is essentially now the previous generation V2. But Ducati says, 70% of peak torque is available from 3,000 RPM. So really, that's where you're going to see that street-oriented feel of that bike. And yeah, let's see, 80% of torque, 80% of peak torque across 7,000 RPM. So you really can see what they're trying to do with that engine, right? And make this a bike that's going to be a lot more flexible and easier and better solution for street riders, while still having some track performance to it, obviously. I will say the other thing that they said, and I don't have this in the notes here, but I remember going back and studying for some of the content we were doing before, and they said they did take the thing to the track, obviously, in the testing, and it was like 0.2 of a second slower than the previous gen. So obviously, you look at the big horsepower difference on the bike, and you look at what they've done and try to soften the package a little bit, but at the same time, they're suggesting essentially that they still go to the racetrack with it and be really close to what that to the previous gen was.
That's a cool claim.
Yeah, best of both worlds, hopefully, right?
Yeah, I mean, and when they go racing with it, obviously they're going to pump it up to 11 and it'll still be as fast and it'll be way lighter. So
yeah, that's the other thing we haven't really talked about is the weight on the bike, which is significant.
Yeah, what, 34 to 37 pounds lighter on the Panigale?
Yeah, 30. Based on the math that I've seen, so they only measure them wet weight, no fuel. And so you have a V2 and a V2S. The V2S gets the only suspension. It gets the lithium battery in it and a single seat setup, so no passenger accommodations. And the range compared to the current gen is 30 to 37 pounds lighter, whether you're on the base or with the S model. So significant change there. I think the engine itself, and go back in the notes, the engine is 21 pounds lighter than the old Superquadro 955.
Yeah.
That's
Wow.
significant.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
That's a lot of metal removed for sure. So, Waheed, you're always one to comment on looks and how things look. What do you think this new Panigale looks like? Do you like it? Do you not like it? I kind of like it not having so many wings on it, but
Yeah, I think it looks neat. Kind of follows along the lines of the 950 Super Sport. In my opinion, a little bit with the face. A little softer edges, but I like it. I like it, but at the same time, it doesn't really wow me at all. But it kind of follows their design language from the 950 Super Sport. I think, and yeah, it's okay. The old bike was pretty old looking, so it's cool that they're doing something new.
yeah, definitely the other bike had definitely the previous generation Panigale look to it. So, I don't know. I think it looks nice. Maybe
I will
that's
say
just
two
me.
things on the looks. The first is that you can, on the opposite, this is just a complete opposite side of the spectrum from like KTM, which we saw like their RC8C concept, and it's just like lines everywhere on that thing, right? And it seems like Ducati's, they're a lot more muted. It's a lot more rounded surfaces and things, it seems like. The other thing I will say is that I got to go ride the Panigale V4 about a month or two back, and it looks so much better in person. Really good
Wow.
looking motorcycle in person. So I think that you're going to kind of have that same thing with this V2 because the looks are really similar.
Mm-hmm. Electronics wise, it's got tons of stuff, but what it doesn't have is the Ducati vehicle observer like on the big bikes. Probably doesn't need it, but wondering if that was just a cost cutting measure because this bike, you know, it is a less expensive Ducati super super bike or super sport bike. So,
It's
you know,
almost $3,000 less than the current gen, what will
yeah,
become the
that's
previous
a
gen.
that's a huge difference. So you've got a
Yeah.
cheaper bike, you've got something that's probably more comfortable to ride, much lighter, maintenance is better. It's got 18,000 mile valve intervals, not quite the same as the Gran Turismo V4 that's in the Multistrada, which is like 36,000 miles, but without that Desmo, you get a long service life. I mean, it all makes sense to have a very affordable Ducati sport bike experience, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Obviously we saw the YZF R9 recently, and I think you're just seeing the evolution of that super sport category, and this is kind of where we're at now. And yeah, so that V2, it's basically $16,000, and then the V2S is right at 19. It's like 18,995, whereas the current gen is 18,795. So you're getting the S model with the, suspension and stuff for essentially the same price as what the current previous gen is, and then yeah, you're saving about $3,000, sorry, going with the base model. So yeah, pretty cool.
All the
Yeah.
old owners are going to be a little upset over that, I'm sure.
Yeah, unless yeah, you're probably right. Probably
Yeah,
right.
that might make the used market tough, right? You're gonna go, hey, I'm gonna sell my previous generation V2, but I want more money than what a new one is gonna cost. That might be a tough thing for them. But also Ducati owners, man, they for the most part they love their motorcycles and they're willing to not worry about the price as much as maybe other owners, right? If you're striving to aspire to own a Ducati, you're good with the price usually.
Yeah,
Totally.
I agree. It does. I will say one of the big trends I've seen recently is this trying to build out the middle area of a manufacturer's lineup to get people in, entry level and middle displacement machines to get people into the lineup and make sure that, they're into the brand and then they can, move up through the brand that way. And
Exactly.
I think that seems like what Ducati is really trying to do here is get people back into that Panigale lineup, into their sport bike lineup, and then they've obviously grow into the V.
Yep. So speaking of more accessible and more comfortable, that takes us to the Street Fighter version, the V2 Street Fighter. So basically, it's got some changes to the geometry. Obviously, it doesn't have a fairing, um, but I think it looks pretty rad. Like that's more my style. I'm not a super track kind of guy, but I do love a high performance naked.
Yeah, and cheaper than it was before, right? And what I can't remember. I think the actual gap between Panigale and Street Fighter is now larger in terms of pricing. Like the Street Fighter is even cheaper, $15,000 for the Street Fighter V2, and then let me see my notes. 17,995 for the V2S. Whereas the
Nice.
current gen Street Fighter V2 is 18,195.
Yeah,
Big
that's
cost
a
savings.
big price difference.
Yeah.
Cool Ducati's trying to make these things more affordable for once, going in the right direction instead of the opposite direction, at least with these models.
With these models, I mean, Ducati's always known to have like special editions that are, you know, super expensive relatively. But you're paying for the exclusivity and all that stuff. And it makes sense for Ducati. Like that, there's a higher margin in special editions. And I expect that next year we're gonna see a V2 some special edition and a Street Fighter V2 special edition that'll bump the price up, but they'll have like rad paint or special graphics and some different suspension components. So if you want to get gnarlier with these two bikes, it's coming. Don't worry about that.
I will say that my thought or the question I have is the thing about a Street Fighter. You always think of it as just this like aggro thing, right? It's like drinking a gallon of coffee or something and just being like ah. And so now when you talk about it being based on this new Panigale V2 platform, or it's sharing the same platform, which is essentially a little bit softer around the edges. Now you've got this Street Fighter where Street Fighters are supposed to be that really aggressive feel, and it's based around a little bit of a softer package. So that'll be the big question I have is it still as exciting as you want a Street Fighter to be? Or is it more just about, upright ergos and being comfortable and having a good kind of like city commuter bike? Yeah, I like a Street Fighter to really wake me up, which we know the V4 does. So it does well.
I'm
Yeah,
sure this thing still will, have some punch and pow. Ducati always gets that right, no matter what. Their bikes are always a little popped up and fun to ride. So I wouldn't sweat that too much, Bradley.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. A soft Ducati is still more aggressive than most things.
Fair.
Mhm.
Well, let's get into the next one that we want to talk about, which is Aprilia's Tuono 457. So this is the second model powered by their new parallel twin small bike.
Yeah, it's a great little engine, great little bike. It's so cool that they're making a naked version now to follow up, in line to the full fairing sport bike. Sorry, Bradley, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say it was funny because Justin, I think as you know, we were just riding the RS457 a couple weeks back, doing like a little small bike test, and that was my first time getting to ride that bike, and almost right away I was like, this engine and chassis would make so much sense as a Tuono. It's great to have the sport bike looks, and obviously I'm a sport bike guy, so I can appreciate that. But I think for the vast majority of customers, the looks and feel and ergonomics of the Tuono just makes so much sense, and especially in that package. And so, yeah, I assumed it was maybe another year off or something, and yeah, so to see it already announced was really cool. I think that bike's going to be massively successful because that RS457, I really like that as like an entry level machine. It's got just enough friendliness to it where it is something that a complete new rider, beginner rider can get on and enjoy it and feel comfortable on it and kind of build their skill set. But at the same time, it doesn't look or feel like an entry level machine. It's like really solid fit and finish. They like borrowed so much design language from everywhere else in their lineup and all the technology that they've got, developing RSV4s. And yeah, it really helped with that. It helped elevate, I think, that RS457. I think it's the same with the Tuono. So I'm excited about that bike. A completely different look than I think we were maybe expecting. I think the Tuonos have always had a certain look to them, and this one's maybe a little bit different. And it's kind of interesting that it's got like a dedicated tank to it and a completely different headlight setup, again, than what we've traditionally seen on other Tuono models. So maybe not exactly the look we were expecting, but I think chassis and engine and electronics on that bike are so good that the Tuono
Yeah.
is just gonna.
It's more traditional naked bike than maybe some of the other Tuonos, right? Like you look at the Tuono and it's basically like a fully faired sport bike with the side fairings and sometimes the belly band taken off. It's
That's changing this year,
hardly.
though. That's
It is
changing.
changing. It is
Yeah,
changing.
Aprilia, which we'll talk a lot about some of the other bikes that they introduced, but they're pulling the belly pan off all their bikes and they're trying to make them a little bit more naked. Because yeah, I know
Yeah.
that's been a trend lately. And
Yeah, it's
again,
based.
one of those things is we're seeing one of the cool things about all these bikes being launched at the same time and talking about EICMA is you really do see the shifts in trends. Like all at once, there's this push, and you're like, okay, I see where in this case Aprilia is going, and especially with their naked bikes. Yeah, making them
Yep.
more naked.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. So, yeah, it's going to be a cool bike. I can't wait for us to get out and ride it. And like we said, we're touching on other Aprilia models. Like they basically didn't leave even one of their models untouched for 2025. Big changes on everything. The RSV4 gets even more horsepower. Now it's 220 horsepower. So it's only up 3, but I mean, 220, that's gnarly,
But I think Aprilia was pretty smart in the way they approached this because basically what they did is almost from what I can tell, going through all the notes, all the stories, all the documents we have, all the bikes got essentially the same changes. It's throttle bodies and exhaust. So they
Mhm.
all got larger throttle bodies and they got basically different exhaust systems. I think they're a lot more straight. The headers and stuff are reshaped, and yeah, that's basically how they're getting. All of the bikes have just a little bit of a horsepower bump over before, which is interesting. I think that was very resourceful and efficient of them to do that. Like they found some tricks and they're just applying it to every model in the lineup, it seems like.
Yep. And then, yeah, so we talked about more horsepower, some braking upgrades on the RSV4. But then the interesting part is the Tuono 660 factory. Now there's only a factory model. Adam, what, like going from, like, why would they go from not having a base model to a base model to a factory and chucking the base model? What's the point in that?
Who knows? Maybe the sales were slow and they're trying to just, add some pizzazz to it, I think. I don't really know. Like, that's the one thing that, Piaggio Group and Aprilia really struggle with America is, they make some really great bikes, but they don't really sell sometimes, and for sure them having these, middleweight products now, that really helped them this last couple of years. But who knows? I mean, the one tricky thing that they're going to get into now is now that they've expanded their model lineup amongst, virtually all their brands, they're going to have a hard time, factoring in supply and demand, supply and demand, supply and demand. So, it's great that they make a lot of new cool models, but, supply and demand thing is probably going to have to be a key part of their strategy, for 2025 and beyond. So maybe that's part of it, just trying to make something that people are going to maybe want to purchase more than something else.
Just adding more value, getting a bigger margin on the bikes they are selling. It makes sense. Especially if sales are a little slow, you make it on margin instead of volume. Makes sense. But even so, like, Aprilias traditionally have not been as expensive as other high performance motorcycles. So I've always seen Aprilia as offering pretty good value for what they're putting out. But
I agree.
Definitely a smaller dealer network. So there's some challenges there. Less well known, even though they, have some great stuff. But I'm excited.
Actually, I haven't ridden a Tuono 660. How is that bike, Adam? You've spent some time on it before, right?
Yeah, they're awesome. I mean, all the Aprilias are always awesome, and now with that middleweight, parallel twin package, it's got the coolest thing about these small Aprilias is they have that character of the big bikes, and a lot of companies don't get that right, but Aprilia was able to get that right somehow. So that's really the alluring factor for me is you have a small product that feels like the big product. And again, like most manufacturers do not get that right, but Aprilia did.
It's so funny you say that because that's, like I mentioned with that RS457, and I just wrote some copy on that. And that was basically the theme of what I wrote was how strong that connection was to RS660, to RSV4, and all the technology that Aprilia has been able to develop for those bikes, and you're feeling that in the small displacement entry level machine.
Well, even you said it earlier, like the design language, like all the lines, like their twin spar aluminum frames are kind of crappy and they're casting and stuff like that, but they're still using twin spar aluminum frames, and that's really cool. So it's like just everything's in line, and I don't know, I'm really impressed by that.
Speaking of the Tuono 660 factory, I don't know if you guys noticed, but that one's got the black frame this year. I will say that thing looks really good. That thing looks sharp.
I do.
Not sure about the colors elsewhere in the lineup because they have some.
Oh man, there's some wild,
colors
wild colors. The what is it? The shark skin or stingray
blue? I think is one of them.
I don't know about that color. And the yellow that they put on the Tuono looks like the yellow from 20 years ago Tuono. So those two colors, I'm kind of like,
I like the yellow, but the stingray blue is questionable. So it was an interesting choice for sure. They'll stand out.
So speaking of yellow bikes, I think we should get to the next big news, which is got probably Evan Allen, our associate editor, more hyped about anything from EICMA is the new Suzuki DRZs, DRZ4S and DRZ4SM.
Yeah, wild. They've actually updated those things, came out with new models. would the old one have a 35-year run or something crazy?
Yeah, I think it was actually like 23 or something like that. But it felt like decades. It felt like as long as we've been adults, the DRZ has been the same,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
I mean, I
So
think it's smart. I'm obviously somewhat familiar with the success of CRF 300L platform, before, and like for a while, and I'm not sure if it still is, but best-selling dual sport, period, right? And it just makes so much sense. The space does. If you can have a great offering at an affordable price, and they haven't announced a pricing for this bike yet, but if they can come in at a decent price, I mean, you've got just enough technology, you've got the modern look, and at its core, I mean, it's still, we know that Suzuki can build good engine and good chassis. So all this new stuff, you got to imagine it's going to be exactly what you need, minus the 5-speed transmission, which I know you're hating on a little bit.
yeah, man, like that has been a point of contention with DRZ fans forever, has been the 5-speed transmission. They missed their opportunity to do that, but I mean, it's going to be built at a nice price, so get over it. Put a bigger front sprocket on the thing if you want to go crush some big miles. But it's got a new engine that makes 38 horsepower, claim 38 horsepower, claim 27 foot-pounds of torque. It's not a slouch in the power department. It's not like anything like a 450, gnarly bike, but at the same time, it's got plenty of power. If you want to haul a taller gear to, keep the revs down on a long distance, do that. Stop complaining,
Yeah. I mean, they are a smaller bike, so, having a 6 gear is kind of a moot point a little bit in theory, but at the same time, it's 2024. It's not 1995. We should have 6-speed transmissions. And then, like, it's crazy too, because Suzuki, they overhauled the powertrain. If they're overhauling the powertrain, obviously the transmission has to be new. We think you would put a 6-speed transmission in it. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know. It just seems kind of odd.
Well,
Yeah.
people are asking for it too. That's the thing, right? I
Well,
mean, I'm sure they did a
well,
ton of
for
research to
sure.
figure out what people were looking for.
And what do the competitors use in the class,
Yeah, they all have 6 speeds, but having had previous experience as a product guy at a manufacturer, they bring all these people into a room, right? And they're like, you own a DRZ, you own a DRZ. So tell us what you like. And you get all this thing. You go, okay, we can sell you a 5-speed for whatever it may be, $8,000. And we can sell you a 6-speed, but it's going to be $9,000. Which one would you rather have? I'll take the $8,000 5-speed, and they do their research. They know, but there's plenty of noise being made online and always will be. But their research probably tells them the cost isn't worth it. So let's give them what they want is a nice fair price for a rad motorcycle, right? So, but they did give it fuel injection. So that's, welcome to the modern age, DRC.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll be curious which one sells better. I think we all love the look and idea of a supermoto, and obviously, you've got your 17-inch wheels on this thing, and to me, I almost gravitate toward that originally, but I think the reality is the S, with your 2118 wheels and spoked wheels and the off-road setup. I have to imagine that one's going to sell. That one's going to be the bike that people gravitate towards, right?
Do you think so?
In the past, you look at the old WRs, when Yamaha built those and they had your two options, and just across different lineups, it just seems like, again, we all love the idea of supermoto, but they don't seem to sell in the same way that the dual sport stuff does.
It's going to be dual sport here in the US, but in Europe, the supermoto is going to kill.
Oh, good point. Yeah, good point.
In Europe, in other markets, the supermoto is going to outsell it 3-1, guaranteed. But here, it's the other way around, and we're used to that. And we use motorcycles differently here than Europe, so that's totally rad. But
that's a good sidebar, actually, Justin. I'd love for you to touch on that a little bit, like the importance of understanding global markets, and the idea that the way we use motorcycles here in the States is so different.
Yes, it is
across the world, and especially in Europe, and we see when you look at these new models, we have to understand that a lot of the reasons for changes and the direction that these bikes get pushed, it's not just because of what we want and need here as motorcyclists in the U.S.
Yeah, that's very true, especially for street bikes. Street bikes, Europe drives the market. No matter what we end up with, besides if you're talking about Harley Davidson or a cruiser, you are getting a bike that is meant to appease the buyers in Europe before anything else. And with that, comes most bikes that come here have Euro 5 regulations, on them. They've got, all that kind of stuff. And what's important is that we kind of, because we don't sell so many street bikes here because it's a pastime and not a piece of transportation, that we don't get to choose as much as other markets, but when it comes to dirt bikes, the US absolutely drives the market. What sells here, everyone else gets. So we get our say in the dirt, but everyone else gets their say in the street, and that's just the way it is.
And same thing with like Honda Goldwing, bikes like that.
Everything,
right?
every motorcycle that is a street bike, absolutely they worry about European market before they worry about the US market.
Well, I would say Goldwing is maybe a little bit different, similar to like Harley Davidson.
Yeah, very much
yeah.
so. I guess so. Yeah, I guess
I
the
guess those bikes,
Goldwing,
where
a big
it makes
tour,
sense
sure.
to the U.S. market. Yeah,
very much so. But and now you've got other markets that you have to consider. Coming into the market, Indian market, the Asian market. They get so many more different motorcycles that we don't even get because there's no interest here for them. That you see especially small displacement bikes. But, when you're a global manufacturer, you have to build something that works for everything, not just for one place for the most part.
Yeah. It was funny. I think there was Adam in one of the videos or stories that you did this last week on one of the new bikes. You used the word like tight urban environment, which I realized it was funny. It's a small little thing, but like I live and ride in an urban environment, but for me, it's not tight. Like it's still, in Irvine here where the office is, our speed limit on the side streets are like 55 miles per hour.
Yeah, they're like
It's
highways.
just like it's so different from what you experience in Europe. And I was going back to like times where I've been like riding around in Rome or something or Barcelona, and it's just like a completely different riding experience.
Yeah, take a ride in
Yeah.
Thailand, in Bangkok.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you just all the time, right? And the correct tool for that job is so different than what we have here and our needs are here.
Yep.
That kind of segues into the KTM 390s and being small.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
3 new 390s from KTM. So they took these bikes, they brought them to EICMA. They didn't give anybody any information. They just like put them on the stand and they're like, there they are. And so we don't have any real info on what they are, who they're for, how much they cost, specs of the engines, horsepower, fuel capacities, weights, none of that stuff. But Bradley did, kind of do some speculative and investigations and trying to figure out like, what are these things about and what do they got going on? And all three of them look rad. The 390 Adventure R, the 390 SMCR, which is a supermoto again, and then the 390 Enduro R, which is just like the styling of their 690 Enduro R, which is like a big dual sport machine. So, which one is most interesting to you guys?
I like that 390 Adventure R. I mean, I think the direction of it, making it a little bit more aggro. We'll obviously talk about this next week, but BMW had a concept of 450 GS, and it just seems like people are paying some more attention to that small displacement adventure bike category right now, but at the same time trying to pump more performance into them. And obviously we can see a lot of, yes, there's not a lot of information on these bikes right now, but we can look at what KTM did with the 390 Duke last year and the engine changes, what they went from the 373 to the 390. And it's just that whole package, from the chassis, engine, styling, electronics, everything's just a little bit more on edge. It's a little bit higher. And it seems like that's what they're doing with these bikes as well. And especially with the 390 Adventure R. I mean, everything from, you got the higher fender, the engine's going to be a lot more stout, I imagine, So I think that's going to be a really great package. I wish, I'm 6'3" and I don't fit on these small bikes. I wish I fit them on a little bit better so I could enjoy it more, but we got Evan for that. I
did get to look at the 390 prototype of the 390 up close that was parked at the adventure rally that I went to. One of the guys from KTM was there riding it for fun, like not even like doing any marketing or anything. He just like borrowed it. It still had like that crazy like
Zebra or
zebra or
whatever.
whatever all over it to kind of disguise it. But I walked up to it, looked at it, and it's definitely a bigger bike than the old 390 Adventure. It's a little bit taller. It's got a 21-inch front wheel, an 18-inch rear. It's more off-road
Yeah.
worthy.
Versus the 1917 on the kind of
Exactly.
current generation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but Adam, what about you? Which one are you digging?
Yeah, I'm with Bradley. Just the 390 Adventure. That's the one that I like that bike, and I think it's cool that people can buy an affordable adventure bike and kick up some dust. And yeah, I think that's going to be a neat bike. The other derivatives, yeah, they're cool, but the 390 Adventures, I think
Wow.
that's the cool bike.
I'm most pumped on the SMCR. I'm pumped on the Supermoto bike, which is funny because I'm the adventure bike guy out of the three of us. Like I'm the guy that's like Mr. Adventure, but having ridden, all the 690 SMCRs and 701 SMs from Husky and the Gas 700, like those bikes are stupid fun. And I can see this delivering a lot of that with a nicer price and maybe more being more accessible to people. So, but it'll sell the least out of all of them. But that's the one that I think is the coolest.
Of course, it's like we were talking about earlier with supermotos. It's like I'm Mr. Practical. I want something that can kind of do a little bit of everything, and those are like they're fun machines, and they're kind of the ceiling is there, right? Because they don't work as well in all the different environments, like the adventure bike would, or even the enduro.
Right on.
I had a funny line here. This note on this 390 Adventure R. They said the next era in hardcore adventure travel. I thought that was a funny line for a 390.
Yeah.
That's KTM marketing for you.
So KTM, right? Yeah, you're right.
No, there's no secrets. I used to work for KTM, so I'm familiar with that language, and it is very hyperbolic most of the time.
I mean, I will say I got to go to. They had a big event last year where we rode 1390 Super Duke R, 390 Duke, and 990 990 Duke, and that was my first time really hanging out with a group of KTM representatives, and they are exactly what you see from their product. They're just excited and they're just like all about performance and that like aggressive on edge feel to it. And like they carry that through the product line fully. So if you're a motorcyclist who enjoys that, you enjoy that like kind of on edge nature of something and that aggressiveness, these are absolutely the bikes for you, for sure.
That's certainly what they're going after marketing wise. I don't know how much that is in actuality, but for marketing for sure.
Yeah, they love it. What was the 13? Some of the stuff they just did for their 1390, Justin, where they shot it on a track, like a road race track with their adventure bike on a
adventure
road race
bikes
track with
on
their
road race
990.
tracks.
I saw that.
Like all the photos, like everything was on a road race track, and I'm like, how does that make any sense? But it's very KTM at the same time. Like they're
100%.
always have been, ready to race, and so they're all about that. So.
Not afraid to break the mold, do something a little different, and just be true to themselves, which you got to appreciate and respect,
Absolutely.
Yeah, very much so.
Speaking of 990 Duke R, we saw our buddy Fillmore got to race that, a kind of concept version of that this year in Moto America, a race, and now we got a production bike coming, which I'm surprised by because the 990 Duke is already a pretty aggressive, sporty motorcycle, and now you got even more from this thing. What do you got? More horsepower. It says about 7 more horsepower. Obviously, different suspension. They say stiffer, which means something when KTM says stiffer. Yeah, they just said more aggressive and capable than even the base model, which I think that thing will be really exciting.
Yeah, I think that product has a linkage too for the rear suspension as well now.
It does. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yep, it's got that. It's got a longer swing arm, bigger brake disc. And then, of course, one thing we should talk about is the new display. That one's the landscape display. It's a big, long 8.9 inch, but that's been a massive thing for KTM this year is new displays. So they got the vertical and they've got the landscape.
Touchscreen.
And then, touchscreen. And they got new switch pods on basically everything, right? that's been a big focus for them lately, and I think that kind of enhances the experience. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on these new screens that we're seeing. We're seeing it obviously with KTM, CF Moto with their relationship with KTM. They've been starting to delve into these big screens. I'm trying to think who else. I mean, obviously some
BRP.
auto stuff. Yeah, you're right. Yep, yeah, absolutely. Some of those Can-Ams we rode recently.
No, I definitely dig the big screens. I know that there's lots of purists like, oh, I miss like an analog sweeping dial, like all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, like there's so many functions on these bikes, and that's the one thing that they're focusing on the KTM, especially, is that you can just press the screen to turn on certain features and turn off things instead of going through menus and finding things. It's going to simplify using a switch pod where you can just reach up and tap stuff. So
Yeah.
that's cool. And I mean, we're used to it in our cars. We're used to seeing these big, beautiful displays in our cars. So it only makes sense that it has to transfer to especially the higher end motorcycles. It just has to.
Yeah, I agree. Adam, you made a good point about. I know we both rode the Can-Am, the new Can-Am Origin and Pulse electric bikes recently, which was one of the first bikes I've ridden with these new screens. I remember the user. One of the things I did like about that bike was the user interface and how easy it was to go into menus and turn settings on, off, just because it's all right there in front of you. I think I really like that trend that we're seeing right now with especially this new switch gear when you get a lot of people are doing these toggle little joysticks. I've been riding some of the Yamahas with that recently, and then you get the nice big display. Yeah, for a little while we were starting getting a little bit lost where you've got all of these settings to adjust and like these traditional old school style switch clusters, and it was just like
Yeah.
trying to do too much with too little. So I'm a big fan of the direction manufacturers are heading with these new screens.
Yeah, I think it's like Justin said, it's driven by the automotive, and more importantly, it's driven by what's in your pocket. These smartphones are just getting larger and larger and larger, and people get accustomed to their large screen smartphones. So what do you think they want in their $10,000 vehicle they purchase? Probably a large screen thing. So it kind of just follows that, I think.
Yeah, that's a super solid point. I didn't even think about the phone angle. But yeah, that makes total sense. Phones getting bigger, so it's an everyday thing. You're seeing something larger and larger and larger.
Yeah.
So
We
well,
didn't mention all the new 1390s too.
yeah,
What
yeah.
1390 Super Adventure R, 1390 Super Adventure S, Evo. It's tough because some are not coming to the States. Some are coming to the States a year from now, which we know. Yeah, KTM already gave us a heads up on that. It's 2026 models, but that engine is potent.
Yeah. It's that LC8 just continues to have a life. I mean, it's been around forever. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and more powerful and more useful. I always wonder when are they going to run out of usefulness for that engine, and when's the next KTM engine coming? But it doesn't seem like it's ever going to stop because that thing's just a powerhouse.
Yeah, it's crazy. How do they even meet the new Euro standards? Because other manufacturers have to retire their powertrains, but KTM somehow is able to navigate that somehow and
Yeah,
keep it going.
they're just increasing displacement to maintain or slightly increase power, more compression, more to stay, while using the same amount of emissions is what
But you also
how
got, I
they're
think,
doing
the
it.
camshaft technology for
But
them.
yeah,
I mean, you see that. I mean, again, we mentioned the new Ducati engine earlier. The variable valve timing has been helped, I think, these manufacturers so much
absolutely.
in this in that space. I was going to ask you, Justin, what do you think about a 1390 Super Adventure R? I mean, I don't know. It's got to be in the range of. I know the tuning is different in the engine depending on which platform it's in, but the numbers range from 170 to 190. So, like, at
It
minimum,
was
you're gonna have a 170 horsepower adventure bike. And you're just
it
like,
was already
what?
ridiculous when it was the 1290. So, 1390, like as it just gets bigger and bigger, it's already so much and so powerful that you turn it into off-road motor, enduro motor, whatever the setting is anyways, to tame it down. You're never running sport, sport response with full sport power in the dirt. It's just not usable for the most part, even though I mean their slide control technology is pretty rad. How you can dial it up and down, but it's they've made it usable though. Like all the modes make sense and it's usable in every way thanks to the electronics and the way that they can definitely tune that response and power for what you're doing with it. So I say it's not going to be any more gnarly than the 1290 or an 1190 or a 1090. Like it's
just gnarly in general.
It's just gnarly in general.
I don't know. I mean, I will say I rode that Super Duke last year, and that was a step for sure. I mean, I know they smooth out with the variable valve timing and stuff, but like when that thing hits, I mean, it hits. We talk about, KTM and their personality and what they want to do. It's just build these aggressive, exciting bikes. And I think you see that here. I guess it's kind of like, in some ways, it reminds me of like fishing boats in a way, where you have these, like, they put these big old engines on stuff because it just means it's quicker. You're getting to your next spot quicker, right? Or if you need to get back to weigh your fish or something, right? And it's that same thing, I guess, for an adventure bike where you're like, I just need an engine to get me out over to here, and then I can do my, I can, put it in off-road mode and ride around there, and then, use that power to get back, I guess.
Sure.
It's one way you could sell it, I guess, theoretically.
And on top of that, it's always just displacement creep in general. People want more, so you give them more, even though they don't need it.
Yeah, I know that's been tough for manufacturers, right? Especially as emissions regulations get more and more strict. The last thing you want to do is introduce a new bike that's probably going to be more expensive and makes less power and is heavier. Like, they're doing everything to avoid that.
Yeah, kind of. So, well, we've dove deep into some very interesting motorcycles. There's a lot more. So go to Motorcyclist online to check out, all the other motorcycles that have been introduced. You can go to cycleworld.com as well. Check out all the models there. There's tons of information. You could read for hours on EICMA just from last week. So go check that out. And what I think we need to get to the closing here, which I had a question for both of you, which is what was missing from EICMA? Like not a concept, but an actual production bike. What did you think you might see there, and what were you like wishing to see there, I guess, in terms of like a new sport bike or a new adventure bike or something from a certain manufacturer? Let's start with Adam.
Well, I was kind of curious. Kawasaki was awfully quiet. They didn't really have a lot of new stuff. I mean, obviously they were there, but I would have liked to seen some more stuff from Kawasaki. Usually they're on it with upgrading everything, putting, new body work, new little features on, an existing platform just to boost sales. And they weren't really doing that this year, which is kind of interesting to me. So I would have just liked to seen more from Kawasaki. I know that's kind of a broad range, but
no, that's totally good. I guess I'll go next. We'll give Bradley the last word. But for me, I was really hoping that we would see some more Ducati models with that new single. I was really hoping to see a mono introduced, or a Street Fighter or something else with that engine. I think I was sure there was going to be something in the lead up to EICMA or at EICMA, and we didn't see that. So I hope next year we see something more with that single.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that. You are 100% right. 100% right. So much potential with that.
Ducati was a little quiet too, I would say. Like historically these manufacturers kind of go crazy. I mean, that's their home event. And, two new models and a new powertrain's neat, but like you'd think there would be a little bit more, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, they had like slow releases of some stuff, but they were mainly like colors and, some mild changes, but nothing major this year. So
yeah.
What about you, Bradley?
I don't want to harp on them because they did bring out the new DRZ4s, but I'm really waiting to see Suzuki do some more stuff in the sport bike world. Obviously we love GSX 8R, GSX 8S naked bike was great, but I'm curious what their answer to new R9 and now new Panigale V2 is going to be. You have to imagine that there's something that'll replace or some type of update to GSX R600 or 750. And I understand the market doesn't fully support that at this point, and they've done such a good job, again, with the 800 and the 8R. But as a traditional sport bike guy, man, I'd love to see Suzuki do something with that because, I mean, obviously we know that they're pretty outdated packages at this point, but still so good. Like a GSX-R 600 or 750 especially are just like such good motorcycles, and I don't feel like it would take much. And obviously, as much as they've invested into the next gen super sport stuff, you know, and going racing on GSXR 750s, you've got to imagine that they work on something where they have something that's a little bit easier for customers to go and race on, versus, you know, having to build out a next gen GSXR 750, which I don't know the price of, and that would actually maybe be a cool topic at some point. But yeah, I would love to have seen some more from them. I'm going to keep saying, I think maybe we've talked about it a little bit before, but I would love like a very street-oriented version of a Harley-Davidson Pan America. That's like my thing right now. I would love to. I love
Cruiser
that engine.
guy.
I think it's such a great engine, and like I've seen some custom builds with like you know on 17s and stuff, and I'm just like, I think that would be a cool bike. I really would love to see. I know Harley didn't do anything at EICMA, and they're not EICMA people, but that's one
Yeah,
bike.
it would be cool.
Fingers
Yeah, it would
crossed.
be cool to like maybe it'd be like you know, some sort of sport bike-ish half fairing Pan America based thing, you know, 17s, use this the same 1250 engine, same frame, shorter fork, shorter swing arm, and some kind of cool cowling. That would be epic. Epic, epic, epic. Because that engine is really good. I really like that engine. So
Yeah.
okay, so that's I think gonna wrap it up for this very first episode of the Motorcyclist podcast with Bradley and Adam and I. So you know, I think the main takeaways from this episode is there's a lot of new bikes to see. Go read about them. Be prepared to do your shopping. You know, we really want to hear what you guys think about our opinions about these new motorcycles and of all the motorcycles that were introduced at EICMA. So, you know, obviously comment, all that good stuff. And then next week, we are going to talk about concept bikes. And that's going to be really exciting stuff because there was some really cool stuff like that BMW F450 GS. There's a Honda V3 Turbo. Crazy that they said, we are building this engine. That's like,
Did they
not
say
like,
that?
yes, they said this is going to go in a production model. So whether or not it has electric turbocharging or not remains to be seen, but they said they're building this thing. It's going to go on something. And that's super rad. And then there was some other really cool stuff. So we'll talk about that. I think that's pretty much it. We appreciate your support. If you like our podcast, please give us a follow, subscribe, like, comment, all that stuff. And we'll see
ideas.
Yes.
You got any ideas?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Definitely give us some ideas because we definitely want to talk about the things that you guys care about in motorcycling just as much as we care about. So let us know, and we'll see you next time.